Centipede's dilemma. This concept suggests that when we start thinking consciously about tasks we usually perform automatically, it can interfere with how well we do them. The name comes from a poetic story where a centipede begins to overthink the movement of its legs and ends up unable to walk properly. It's a bit like how you now might be consciously thinking about your breathing, something you normally do without a second thought. Volunteer's dilemma. Imagine you're in a public place, and a person is being attacked by a serial killer. Dozens of onlookers are around, yet none of them take action. Each person assumes someone else will call the police, and no one wants to risk getting involved. This situation mirrors the tragic case of Kitty Genovese in 1964 New York. This phenomenon is often referred to as the bystander effect or Genovese syndrome. Transplant Dilemma. When the demand for organ transplants exceeds the available supply, deciding who should receive a transplant becomes a complex issue. Should the priority go to the youngest patients, the most critically ill, the healthiest, or those who've waited the longest? Morton's fork. This dilemma arises when two contradictory situations both lead to the same conclusion. The term originates from John Morton, a 15th-century figure who argued that whether people lived modestly or extravagantly, they both could afford to pay taxes. The modest lived frugally and could save money, while the extravagant were assumed to have wealth. In either case, they could afford the tax. Dictator's dilemma. A dictator who uses fear to control the public can't truly know what people think because everyone is pretending to agree with him to avoid retribution. This leads to an inability to gauge public opinion accurately. Autonomous vehicle dilemma. In the case of self-driving cars, there's an ethical question of whether the vehicle should prioritize the safety of the driver or the pedestrians in its path. Strategic voting dilemma. In elections, voters sometimes face a tough decision. Should they vote for their ideal candidate, who has little chance of winning, or should they vote for a less favored candidate who stands a better chance? The issue arises when too many people vote for their ideal candidate, splitting the vote and inadvertently helping a less desirable candidate win. However, if everyone votes strategically, the desired candidate may never gain enough support. Back-and-forth dilemma. This dilemma refers to the challenge of liberal, secular societies that demand values like civic responsibility and integrity but cannot enforce these values through law or force. Enforcing them would undermine the very nature of a liberal state, which relies on the moral integrity of its citizens to maintain order. Samaritan's dilemma. In economics, the Samaritan's dilemma refers to the unintended consequences of helping someone in need. While the intention is to provide aid, the recipient might become dependent on this help and lose motivation to improve their own situation. Ironically, the very assistance meant to improve their life might end up stalling their progress. Social dilemma. This is a scenario where, despite cooperation benefiting everyone involved, individuals fail to cooperate because of conflicting self-interests. It's commonly seen in issues like climate change or voter apathy, where cooperation is key but hard to achieve due to individual reluctance. Hedgehog's dilemma. This dilemma comes from a metaphor about hedgehogs who want to huddle together to stay warm, but, because of their sharp spines, end up hurting each other if they get too close. Schopenhauer used this metaphor to explain human relationships, how we crave intimacy, but in doing so risk emotional harm, leading us to build cautious, guarded connections. Hein's dilemma. In this moral dilemma, a man named Heinz has a wife who is desperately ill and requires an expensive drug to survive. Unfortunately, Heinz cannot afford it, and the pharmacist is charging a price 10 times what it costs to produce. The pharmacist refuses to negotiate. Heinz faces the dilemma of whether it's ethical to steal the drug to save his wife. This scenario often serves as a case study in moral philosophy, examining the stages of moral reasoning that come into play. Schelling's dilemma, also called the Habian trap. This theory explains why two groups may engage in preemptive attacks out of fear of being attacked first. This leads to a dangerous cycle of escalating fear and arms races. Even though cooperation would be better for both parties, mutual distrust forces them to adopt strategies that result in worse outcomes for everyone involved. This dilemma is widely used in game theory to show that humans don't always act rationally. especially when fear plays a role. Innocent prisoner's dilemma. This dilemma exists within legal systems where admitting guilt can lead to a reduced sentence, even if the person is innocent. The system inadvertently rewards those who lack integrity by allowing them to admit guilt to avoid a harsh penalty, while potentially punishing those who are honest. Münchhausen Trilemma. This philosophical concept challenges the idea of proving truth, even in logic and mathematics. It argues that all proofs require foundational assumptions, leading to three types of reasoning: circular arguments, where the proposition proves itself; regressive arguments, where each proof relies on another ad infinitum; and dogmatic arguments, where the truth is accepted without further proof. Prisoner's dilemma. Perhaps the most famous thought experiment in game theory. The prisoner's dilemma involves two individuals who can either cooperate with each other or betray one another for personal gain. In a typical setup, two suspects, John Blue and Jan Red, are arrested and kept in isolation. They're offered a deal. If one confesses and the other stays silent, the confessor goes free, and the silent partner gets a long sentence. If both confess, they each get a moderate sentence. If neither confesses, they both get a light sentence. While silence would be best for both, each prisoner faces a dilemma. Betrayal seems like the safer option, given that the other might turn on them. Triffin's dilemma. This dilemma arises when a nation's currency becomes the world's reserve currency. To meet global liquidity demands, the country must run trade deficits, but doing so erodes confidence in the currency's value, leading to potential economic instability. If the nation tries to reduce deficits to protect the currency, it risks global liquidity shortages, disrupting international trade and stability. Trolley Problem. The trolley problem presents an ethical challenge. A runaway trolley is headed towards 5 people tied to a track. You, the driver, can divert the trolley onto a different track where it will kill just one person instead. The dilemma asks whether it is morally right to sacrifice one life to save 5, forcing a decision between the greater good and individual harm. Warwick Dilemma. This dilemma reflects the mystery of why some online posts or forum discussions receive no responses. It could be because the topic is uninteresting, too poorly written to engage with, or so well written that no further commentary is needed. Monty Hall Dilemma. In this classic game show scenario, you choose one of 3 doors, behind one of which is a car, and behind the other 2 are goats. Monty Hall, who knows what's behind each door, opens one of the doors with a goat and offers you a choice: stay with your initial pick or switch to the other unopened door. Despite its seeming counterintuitive, switching doors gives you a 2/3 chance of winning the car, while staying with your original pick leaves you with just a 1/3 chance. Tragedy of the commons. This concept suggests that when a resource is shared by many, each person is likely to overuse it for personal benefit, leading to its eventual depletion. This is often cited in environmental issues like overfishing or overgrazing, where the shared resource is destroyed because individual interests conflict with collective well-being.